From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. There we go. And as if by magic, from Normandy. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Keith. Good morning. How are you?
I'm well this morning. And you?
Oh, I'm just fine. It's a bit of a grey day, but we haven't got the Normandy rain, which we normally have at this time of year. But we're fine.
You're lucky. It keeps coming in every other hour or so here at the moment. It's not at all typical autumn weather. Autumn mist has disappeared somewhere down the drain.
Yes. But bearing in mind, of course, that Normandy weather and Southern English weather are linked to the same weather patterns, so we should normally be having the same joys or pains, whichever you can look at it.
More or less, yes. Yeah. Now, last week you had a delightful young lady with you.
Indeed.
And she was very informative, and I think between us, we all got very enthusiastic that we can start to do things together from Lewis and your part of the world. And we need to have some thoughts on that. But, you know, the thing that stuck in my mind was the nature of the medieval pageantry that you have, because of the Battle of Lewis, I think, and because of the fact that we were one of the very first parts of the country to be taken over by the Normans after 1066. Pageantry is very much a part of our psyche here. So when does it? I think she said that they more or less goes on throughout the year. When is the pageantry season really get going, Harry?
Well, it's every 2 years. We have a major medieval festival. It takes place in around about the beginning of August, lasts for 3 days. And it's quite a significant one. It's not the biggest one in France, but it's getting up there, and it's tremendously well attended. It attracts many thousands of people. But bearing in mind that we're a medieval town, we date from the year 1000, and we had the most, one of the three most powerful castles in Europe. In Domfront, which is now a ruin, unfortunately. It was slighted in 1610 by the king at the time, Henry IV, because he was worried about it falling into the hands of either the Protestants or the Catholics in the wars of religion. So he didn't want to have a problem on his hands if one side or another was entrenched there. So unfortunately, it was destroyed. They did build a second castle here, which in all modesty, we live in. Because it needed to keep a military presence. It was a very important sector to defend the Normandy heartland. And so they built a second castle here, which was garrisoned until, I would say about 1800, a little after Napoleonic times, in fact, probably about 1820. And then it was slowly absorbed by the town. and the one remaining building is the town in which is the building in which we live. We are a medieval town. There's all sorts of medieval features to it. There are tours the year round, but the big moment of the year, which now twice every 2 years, is the big medieval festival, and that's indeed what we could have in common with Lewis. The slight difficulty, and I think a slight difficulty, is the enormous difference, of course, in population size. Lewis, I forget now what the population is, but am I right in thinking it's approaching 100,000, or is it as many as that? I'm not sure.
No. The town of Lewis is only 17,000.
Oh, well, that works.
Yeah, the political district, Lewis district, which stretches way out into the countryside and embraces several other little towns and so on and so forth. That is about 100,000.
Okay.
So the MP represents 100,000, but the town itself is about 17,000.
Okay, well that makes it easier then, because we're around about 5,000. But bearing in mind that towns in France are much smaller than towns in England, they're less densely populated. We've got an example about 20 kilometers from us, where the Massey is twinned with Ludlow in Shropshire, and Ludlow, I think, is running up towards about 100,000, and so you've got a small town which is probably about 10,000 left after Massey. So there is a discrepancy in terms of population size, but that's because of the difference in town sizes in the two countries. So a twinning possibility is quite on the cards, I believe, because of the common interest, because of what you've mentioned, the medieval aspect.
Yes. Well, actually, Harry, I've been sort of making tentative inquiries, and the twinning process is a very, very lengthy one. It has to go before councils and so on and so forth. We've already got two towns that we're twinned with, Blois, 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 and Oldchot.
But we're not twinned with a town in France for the moment, though.
Is in Blois in France?
Blois, you're talking Blois, yes,
yeah.
In France. Also,
yes.
You wouldn't, in that case, you wouldn't want a second French twinning.
Well, they're not averse to having more than one, but the process is quite lengthy, and I'm not sure that there's the appetite for doing that at the moment with so many other problems. But I do believe that that we would get some support from the historical societies, and we have a very, very strong historical society here. And also, I think that probably it would strike a chord with your merchants and ours. And I, strangely enough, I rolled out of bed this morning and riffled through a few papers, and we have something called the Lewis News here. It's hardly going to win Newspaper of the Year award, but nonetheless, it had here an article, if I can just find it, because it's not very big, which tells us what. No, I can't find it just offhand, but it tells us about Rotary. And why Rotary is called as it is. And apparently it started in the States. And the reason that here we are, Rotary in Lewis, and it gives an outline of of what it does. And apparently it started in the States amongst a group of people who felt that they wanted to give service to the community above themselves. And they actually met in one another's back rooms.
Okay.
I mean, now apparently it is so huge. I didn't realize that Rotary has got representation on the United Nations, would you believe? I mean, that's how it's grown. But I think that it says that the one in Lewis is quite small, but it is very active. And it runs a very interesting raft race down the river Ouse. And I think that's the route that we'll go through is the historical association, the social support organisations like Rotary, and the traders, all of whom would I think be intrigued by it and benefit by it.
I
And
agree, yeah.
I think that we could set something up like that. Now, which year are we in?
Well, which year?
Yeah, I mean, is the big one coming up, or is it the
Ah,
year after?
it will be next year. Next year.
This coming year,
Yes,
2024.
that's correct. Yeah.
Right. So I think we need to get our skates on, and we'll do that, shall we?
Sure, why not? And I think
Yes.
that's a good starting point to get a relationship going at different levels. I think it's pretty promising the link between the historical societies, because we have two historical societies here which could be very interested. One of them led by a professor of history who is a very knowledgeable type, and it would help, I'm sure. And then, in terms of the charitable organizations, while I'm not sure whether we have a Rotary Club in the area, we may well have, but we do have a very active Lions Club. And I think Lions, like Rotary, is a universal, it's an international organization. And
Indeed
they do a tremendous job and animate all sorts of activities in the town. So there could well be common ground as an initial link between the two countries, between the two towns. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think that there are some pointers there of the way we should go. And if we're talking, even if it's only a nominal thing for this year, this coming year. Now, what sort of time of year are we talking about? When does it start?
Well, the actual festival is in the month of August, as I say, usually around about the beginning of August. But planning for it, because is in process now. So there's a permanent committee in existence, which is constantly working on these things. And of course, the tourist office, the young lady that you met last week, is highly involved in all of this kind of thing. And
very keen on doing something.
Speaks good English. She speaks very good English.
She does. Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
A
fascinating background too.
Yes, that's right. So it should be a great contact to have. So we could start working through the different tourist offices. I'm assuming that you have an active tourist office in Lewis.
Well, we have a tourist office. I'm not sure. It's attached to the local council, and they are not the most dynamic of people, but nonetheless, so they have the remit to do what they can for tourism. So I'm quite sure that we will find that they're willing to get involved.
Yes.
And I think that now that we begin to get a clearer picture, having spoken to, her name is the lady from last week.
Well, from last week, Anne-Laure Chausserie is her name.
Anne-Laure, yeah. It's the second bit that I can't get my tongue around to begin with. Anne is easy.
Anne-Laure. Laure. Anne-Laure.
Right. And I mean, I think that she was very keen on it, and we've got the driver. Suddenly, we've had a burst of sunshine, and it's.
I can see it all the way from here. Invading your studio, yeah.
But I think that would be, and my gut feeling, Harry, is that quite often these things are very successful if they get some sort of commercial operation behind them. And I'm very tempted to talk to you off the air. We will be careful what we say on, but to approach the Transmarsh people, the ferry people, who could benefit very much from the traffic backwards and forwards between our two countries. So that's the sort of thing that's going through my mind at the moment.
Well, that's also, it's a very good point. But I also believe that if you're going to get somebody to sponsor something, you need to be able to identify the benefits that are going to accrue to them. And so we need to get our ducks in a row before approaching anybody for sponsorship. and to
Yes,
know
well,
what
we need to
the
talk
mutual
in more
benefits
detail, of course,
are.
but very, very broadly, I mean, I think there are lots of, as they would say, the runes are good.
Mm-hmm. No, all the elements are there. It's just a question of putting them in the right order. But if an initial meeting between the interested parties determine what the mutual benefits are, and then we can present them to whomsoever,
Absolutely.
first of all to the two local councils, and certainly to potential sponsorships. Because there are benefits, I'm sure, not just in the tourist field, as you've mentioned, in the commercial field, and a lot of people would love to have a relationship, a cross-channel relationship. After all,
Absolutely.
France is the nearest neighbor, and relations go up and down between England and France. There's no harm in getting a little bit of a diplomacy working here. We've got to remember, of course,
Absolutely not.
the
And actually, I mean, I think that the sort of conflict, if you like, between the English and the French is that of friendly neighbours. You know,
Mhm.
is we laugh at one another and when we tease one another, but all in all, when it comes down to it, is we would close ranks very quickly if any third party tried to interfere.
I think that's true. Yes, yes, I can swear to that. I'm actually I have the benefit of being married to one of them, and so there you go. But bearing in mind, of course, there's a link here. I mean, I don't know whether we could get this high, but the French president Emmanuel Macron, his great great grandfather, are you ready for this one? Was a butcher's boy from Bristol.
Oh, really?
Yes, I mean
Oh,
it's an amazing piece of a little snippet of news. He was a young lad that went over in the First World War, and he I think he was wounded, and in convalescing, he was looked after by a very nice lady French nurse, and they fell in love and got married. And so and Macron is direct descendant of
a butcher's
a
boy.
butcher's boy from Bristol. So there you go.
Yeah,
Guy called.
well, you know, immediately my mind goes is let's get the meat packers behind us.
That's right, of course, yeah. So
Now, Harry, you're our eyes and ears when it comes to your part of the world. What's been going on this week that might be of interest to us? And when I say us, I don't mean necessarily Lewis, but to Britain generally, because as you well know, being an ex-journalist and I've stuck with it for most of my life, is that often the public only pick up what they want to pick up, and they sometimes miss some of the important stuff. So, what's happening in your part of the world?
well, I think we're experiencing the same influences as are happening in Britain. The war in Israel and Palestine. Well, I shouldn't. Palestine, of course, we've got to be careful there. It's in the Gaza Strip. Palestine, for the moment, there isn't such a place as Palestine. It's simply an idea that should be fulfilled, I'm sure. But the war going on there is dominating the French news channels. Ukraine is taking a back seat. Economics, as you're having in Britain, Britain is coming up towards an election. Same situation in France. So there's great similarity as to what the news cycle is in both countries. You know, domestically and applied, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, what common problems apart from those that you mentioned? I mean, how is the French economy for one thing?
Well, the French economy, again, like the British economy, is highly indebted. There's such a huge proportion of the budget is going into servicing previous debt, and they've European inflation has come down quite reasonably. Britain's is coming down, but not nearly as much, nearly as much as it should. And of course, American inflation has come way down. So it's half of what Britain's is. So you've got the economic factors all at play. That too affects life in France. The cost of living in France is holding fairly steady as opposed to the cost of living in Britain. Particularly, I understand foodstuffs, vegetables, basic supplies, food supplies in Britain are still running at an all-time high. So I think there's probably a bigger hurdle to get over in Britain than there is in France. But both countries suffer from being monumentally in debt, perhaps a legacy of COVID and the overspending. There's just the loose money at the time of COVID to keep the economies going. But something that began well before COVID, and they don't be showing any signs of tightening purse strings. They're constantly overspending budgets, spending our grandchildren's money, I suppose you might call it.
Yes, yes.
So
The constant refrain from our politicians is to get the country back running again. And there is no question. I mean, one of my little rants earlier today on this channel was, for instance, my barber. He has a second chair, and I say to him, "Are you soon going to get somebody?" And he said, "I keep on having people come and be interviewed." He said, "And I offer them the job, and then I never hear from them again." And one of the things that the government has said, which is controversial, because no liberal with a small L likes the idea of forcing people, but what they said is that they're going to withdraw NHS benefits to people who go for a job and just use it to get unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits, not unemployment insurance. So getting the country running again has been something of a problem. Has that been a problem in France?
Less so, I feel. There has been a tendency in Britain, I understand, to have people working from home, which has not been a success. I'd not go so far as to say it's a total failure, but it hasn't been a success. And it's particularly evident from what we read in areas like the civil service, where people are going into the office 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and that's all. And so productivity is way down. We're not having that particular problem in France at the moment. There is an enormous number of jobs which are desperately looking for skilled labor or semi-skilled labor that can't be filled because either the skills aren't there or people just don't want to work. So in that sense, there's a parallel between the two countries. We have lots and lots of vacancies and people are not ready to fill them. But that takes us into what you might consider dangerous territory, which is the huge question that both countries are facing of immigration. There is no effort, from what I can see, to select people because of their skills. Anybody and everybody is coming in, and most of the people will just become an additional burden on the state rather than providing the necessary, filling the necessary jobs. It's unlike the country in which you and I spent many years of our lives, Canada, which has a selective system, as indeed does Australia, where a point system, if you will, where people who have the skills that are necessary for the jobs available are given preferential entry. But there's nothing like that in France and England. Yeah. And so there is an enormous cultural change happening. But as I say, it's like walking on eggs, this one, because it's a delicate subject. The latest figures show that France's second language, which is Arabic, could well be its first language in 30 years' time.
Wow! Particularly the pride in French that the French have is that must be stinging very, very much in the corridors of power.
Well, indeed, but I mean, in Britain, what we read in the newspapers and see on television, there are hundreds of thousands of people parading who are perhaps British and by in context, they've got British passports and what have you, but they're not British in the heart. So they're not they're importing their own, seeking to establish their own country, their own values in what is geographically Britain. But again, it's a very delicate subject because well, it borders on racism to talk about this, and
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to put my foot in that minefield. Uh, but
Yeah.
it's
I think
both
Harry.
countries are changing radically because of that.
Yes, I think the thing that bothers me the most is Brexit. Of course, very had a very severe effect on the community. I mean, father was not talking to son, and so on and so forth. And what really it raised that I never thought I would see in Britain is where two people would not sit down and discuss a topic. And I had several friends that I admire and love in many, many ways, but they would not permit Brexit to come into the conversation. And I find that sort of closed mind among sensible people doesn't bode well for sorting out some of these other problems which you just articulated.
Well, of course, and I mean something like Brexit, which is quite critical, should be discussed openly, and the pros and cons, and it shouldn't become a religious question for or against. It used to be that if you went to the local dinner party, you weren't allowed to discuss sex, religion, war, and whatever it was. Then what does that leave to talk about? Because these are the basic statements in life. So Brexit should be talked about, and the unfortunate part is that I think both sides of the Brexit argument, the shrill voices, are not well informed voices. There are arguments, very strong arguments for, and very strong arguments against. But those arguments are beyond just, as I say, religious opinion. They're ones that need to be analysed, and the only way you can do that is putting it on the table. Bearing in mind, of course, that I don't think Britain has, and certainly viewed from this side of the water, Britain has not taken advantage of its Brexit freedoms. There was an opportunity to go their own way. Now, that their own way, would that have been better or is it worse? I'm not saying. But at least they were able to take their destiny back into their hands, the British, with Brexit. They have not done so. And so the collective approach, which is the European approach, is now diverging and going in a different direction. So Britain has lost out through not exploiting Brexit. And that's nothing to do with the benefits pro or con Brexit. It's not been used. I think Britain has been very poorly led. I think there's a rocky road ahead for Britain. I don't see Britain going back into Europe. I really don't. I think that die is cast. Yes. But until they take advantage of their newfound freedom, they won't know what direction they're going in.
Well, as you say, it's rocky ground, but I tongue in cheek to some extent, but I start this program quite often saying there are 650 MPs in Westminster, and I wouldn't give you tuppence for any of them.
Well,
but sometimes I am guilty of lowering things, not lowering things, but equating things to local politics. And a recent mayor, who I say recent because he passed away a couple of months or so ago, but he was a very, very good mayor, and he was very close to Mirador. And I would say, Stephen, I think you should come on and you should talk about this. And he'd say, he'd look at me resignedly and he'd say, I sometimes wonder what the problem is. And I said, but what you do as mayor is you provide leadership, which is very thin on the ground. And I think that what we haven't got at the highest levels is leadership. We've probably got capable people, but we haven't got anybody leading them. and that's a source of agony to me.
Well, for a leader to lead, he needs to know where he or she is going. And the situation at the top level, at the parliamentary level, and it may be reflect what happens at local government level, is that we live now in the age of professional politicians, people who set off as politics as a career. It didn't used to be like that when even in our lifetimes. Very often we were led by people who had proved themselves in different fields, and therefore they brought a variety of viewpoints into the management structure, and they then gave back to society or gave back to the nation in some ways the benefits that had helped them. So there was a sense of giving, and from those groups, many of them had leadership potential. But if you're going to professional politics today, as let's say as a young parliamentary assistant, you've got to actually keep your views. You've got to just bend all the time. You've got to compromise all the time. You've got to learn. Here's a big one coming up. You've got to learn to lie. The art of modern politics is to, well, maybe lying is a strong word, but to learn not to tell the truth. Because if you told the truth, you'd never get past the first rung, the second rung, and you certainly wouldn't reach the higher levels of government. So, and instead of telling the people the unfortunate truths, they prefer to put them to sleep with the soporific statements, and that's what we're suffering from at the moment. I don't think either party in Britain, for instance, is prepared to tell the nation exactly the truth of what's happening, and they're living in self-denial.
Yes,
but that's a very personal view, from being a Brit myself. But seeing the broader picture, because I live away from it. Once you live in it, you become tied up in the partisanship, and fortunately, I'm freed of that. So I do have an independent, not an independent, almost a neutral view. Whereas I'm not, involved in conservatives or Labour or Liberals. I just see the fortunate opportunity to see the bigger picture, and it's very disappointing from all parties. I don't see the conditions for leadership emerging in a professional politician world.
Harry, hold that thought. Because we are so thin on the ground, Liza Page has arrived. I'm just going to let her in, and I shall be right back.
I get the impression that Keith, my dear friend of many years, we started off together when we were pretty young in Vancouver, Canada. We were both trying to find our way. I think he seems to be in charge of everything in this television station. He obviously is the doorman, and I'm very impressed that he does all this single-handedly. I guess he's turning a little handle at the bottom to make the camera work. I'm not sure, but
it's not far off from that.
quite an amazing person. I was just saying in your brief absence there, Keith, that you seem to be a one-man band, and how you play all these instruments at once, it's amazing. But all credit to you.
Harry, can I just tell you, since you've opened the door, I've worked for all the biggies, of course, Reuters, BBC, ITV, and so on and so forth. Even set up Russia Today. So I've been there, done that. And generally speaking, what's happened over the last decade internationally is that the money men have got hold of local media, and they've cut the tripe out of it, so that you don't really have a true local media anymore. And I clung to the belief that there is some merit in having a local radio station, a local television station, local
indeed, indeed.
So I fought against the odds in terms of keeping this local television station going. But as we get into Netflix and the streamers, it looks as if our sort of very, very local type of operation won't really resurface. But some people have, through social networks, started global networks that are hybrid, that are partly local and partly international. Mm-hmm. And I do see a future there. And that's how I actually don't, or this television station doesn't look after lost cats and lost car parks, that sort of thing. We try to bring internationalism and an outside view to Lewis, and then in turn take the Lewis view out into the wider world. And slowly it's beginning to work. And through the good offices of people such as yourself, who broadcast from overseas and give us the benefit of your view. It's a slow process, but it's beginning to work. And I think that if we can, if I can give you an example, is the gentleman who occupies this slot on a Wednesday, Dr. Mark Maybe, is like you and I, an innovator. And he is part of a new university called the University of Innovation in Manchester, which doesn't have lecture halls. They send people out into practical areas to gain the skills as well as the academic qualifications. And he wants us to spearhead a satellite version of that in Lewis, primarily because we don't really have an academic base here. So if it's starting to kick off those sort of things, and the sort of things that you and I are talking about in terms of sharing medieval festivals and tourism, then it is beginning to work. And I'm prepared to sort of lay my life on the line, as it were, for things like that. So I think that you're making not only a huge contribution to our television station, but also to developing this hybrid sort of TV, which I think will eventually take off around the world. And once again, we're innovators. We started a new Scribes.
Well, I share your optimism, but probably approaching it from a different point of view, and that is that we're going through a period, as you say, where the big money is accumulating media holdings. Not dissimilar to the past. If you go back into the Lord Northcliffes and the great newspaper dynasties of time gone by, or more recent times, when individual tycoons have accumulated huge holdings in the media. We've got it now all over the world. I mean, without naming names, well, Murdoch will mention for one, but we've always had this aspect, either people who wanting to make money or influence public thought. And that will always happen. But the pendulum swings, and when it becomes less human, when it becomes almost something created by artificial intelligence, which is what I get the impression Netflix movies are, they feed into some sort of a programming, the kind of plot, the kind of film, the kind of presentation that will reach the common denominator of the audience, and the common denominator through the decline in education and appreciative skills as cognizant skills is slipping. So we're seeing a blandness coming, and I wouldn't be surprised if very soon we have artificial intelligence, if we don't have it already, artificial intelligence writing the plots for next Netflix movies. So the individual creativity that is born in man will eventually triumph, because there'll be a vacuum. There'll be a gap. There'll be something where people don't want to talk to an automated machine. They want to talk to real people. People like us who may be wrong in some of our ideas, but we reflect what people are thinking about. Now, this takes us full circle into the political sphere, where you have, for instance, in Britain and certainly in France, major political parties which do not reflect the worries and the cares and the ambitions of the people. And even within individual parties, you've got the Parliamentary Conservative Party in Britain, which doesn't reflect at all the interests of the conservative movement and the members of the Conservative Party, who are leaving it in droves. They still remain conservatives, but they're not going to vote for people who don't represent their ideas, their views, their hopes, their needs, their aspirations, and whatever. And the same as happens with the Labour Party. They're split also on issues, major issues such as the Palestine question, and so. But very few of these very few of these politicians are reflecting the views of the people, the man, the woman in the street. And so there'll always be a room for what you're trying to do. So I take a positive view. And for that reason, I take a positive view. Not necessarily, I accept the reasons you give, but I would say keep it up. There's a need, and good luck to you.
Oh, with people like you and with Liza Page, who dares to say the unspoken. I mean, when she gets going, believe me, I say jokingly that she gives me a black eye. But she's a force to be reckoned with, I'll tell you.
I see. Okay, well, there you go. Yeah.
And as we say in our little logo, is where news is untainted.
Yes.
It doesn't mean to say that we're not biased, but we're biased in the right way.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
Harry, as always, it's a delight to talk to you. And I think that off camera in the week, what we'll do is we'll start to now formulate. We'll make a contact with one or two people in a real way about next August, and that we try to establish some sort of event.
Excellent
event. Because I think that could be very exciting, but also it could be very influential, because I think that too little now do people understand what fun is with another community. And reality is perhaps the theme of our television channel, as opposed to talking to a machine. So we will be in touch.
Okay, with pleasure. Well, I look forward to hearing from it, Keith. And in fact, as you say, let's have a contact out off screen during this coming week, because I've got a few ideas I can run past you.
Good.
See where we go from here.
Right. Okay, Harry. Now we actually can use this system off air. I mean, in other words, not broadcasting, to talk to one another. So I'll let you know when I'm going to sort of I'll give you some time frames so that we can sit down and use this medium to chat through a few things.
Perfect. Okay, I look forward to it. Okay.
Thanks, Harry.
Okay. Goodbye to everybody. Right. Bye bye.
See you, Pip.
Hello.
Right. It is now 10:43. Countdown to the start of the week, the real start of the week, where the lady who gives me the black eyes is lurking, ready to pounce. So let's just take a little gap, just a little bit of a break, and then we'll be back. Will we be back? Can't wait. Dear. I didn't ever find this damn thing. I can really not. There we go.